The email notification chimed at 9:47 a.m. on what I thought would be another ordinary Tuesday. My phone screen displayed Marcus Chen's name, my former boss at Pinnacle Financial Solutions. 21 days earlier, he had terminated my employment via a cold, three-sentence email, after 8 years of building his company's entire debt acquisition portfolio, from nothing to over $200 million. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now his name flashed across my screen again, but this time his voice carried desperation instead of dismissal. He needed me back immediately, he said, because the bank was demanding explanations about some irregularities in their loan documentation, and I was the only one who understood the intricate filing systems I had created. What Marcus didn't know was that I wasn't just the loyal employee he had discarded without a second thought. 3 weeks ago, I had quietly purchased the controlling interest in his company's outstanding debt obligations. I was about to become his biggest problem. The morning that would eventually reshape my entire understanding of corporate loyalty began like countless others before it. I arrived at Pinnacle Financial Solutions at precisely 7:15, 90 minutes before most of my colleagues would begin filtering into the sleek downtown office building that housed our operations on the 14th floor. These early hours had become sacred to me during my 8-year tenure with the company. Quiet moments to review acquisition reports, analyze market trends, and prepare strategic recommendations without the constant interruptions that characterized our fast-paced financial environment. My office, while modest compared to the executive suites on the 16th floor, occupied a strategic position near the research department, with direct access to the document archive room where I spent considerable time each day. The space reflected my analytical personality: organized filing systems arranged by date and risk category, walls lined with market performance charts rather than decorative artwork, and a desk arranged with methodical precision. The only personal touch was a small jade plant my sister had given me when I first started at Pinnacle, somehow managing to thrive despite the fluorescent lighting and climate-controlled atmosphere. As senior debt analyst, I had built a reputation within Pinnacle for identifying undervalued debt instruments that other analysts overlooked or deemed too complex to evaluate properly. While my colleagues focused on high-volume, straightforward acquisitions that generated quick returns, I specialized in distressed commercial loans, municipal bonds with complicated restructuring requirements, and corporate debt from companies navigating bankruptcy proceedings. This work required patience, extensive research, and the ability to see potential value where others saw only risk and paperwork complications. My approach differed fundamentally from the aggressive acquisition style that Pinnacle typically favored. Instead of pursuing obvious opportunities that attracted multiple bidders and drove up prices, I spent weeks analyzing financial statements, regulatory filings, and legal documents to identify debt instruments trading below their actual value due to information asymmetries or market misunderstanding. This methodical approach had generated over $43 million in unexpected profits for Pinnacle during my tenure, though I suspected most of the executive team attributed this success to market conditions rather than analytical expertise. The morning of September 15th began with my usual routine: strong coffee from the machine I kept in my office to avoid the crowded break room, systematic review of overnight market movements in the distressed debt sector, and careful examination of new acquisition opportunities that had appeared in the institutional trading platforms we monitored. Tuesday mornings typically brought fresh listings from the previous day's bankruptcy filings and corporate restructuring announcements, creating a steady flow of potential investments that required immediate evaluation before competitors identified the same opportunity. At 7:45, I was deep in analysis of a particularly intriguing municipal bond offering from a small city in the Midwest when my computer chimed with an internal message notification. The sender was Marcus Chen, Chief Executive Officer and founder of Pinnacle Financial Solutions. This was unusual, as Marcus typically communicated through his assistant or during formal departmental meetings, rather than direct messages to individual analysts. The message was brief and formal: "Please see me in my office at 9:30 this morning. Important matter to discuss. Bring your current project files." The tone struck me as oddly distant, lacking the casual friendliness that usually characterized Marcus's communication style. During my 8 years at Pinnacle, our working relationship had been professional but warm, built on mutual respect for each other's expertise and shared commitment to the company's growth. I gathered my current project documentation, including the detailed analysis I had been preparing on several promising debt acquisition opportunities worth approximately $15 million in total. These represented weeks of research and due diligence, positioned to generate substantial profits if executed properly. I assumed Marcus wanted to review these acquisitions before presenting them to the investment committee, perhaps accelerating our timeline to capitalize on favorable market conditions. The elevator ride to the 16th floor felt longer than usual, though I attributed this to anticipation about discussing my latest recommendation. Marcus had always been supportive of my analytical approach, even when other executives questioned the time I spent on complex due diligence procedures. His backing had been instrumental in securing approval for several unconventional acquisitions that ultimately proved highly profitable for the company. Marcus's corner office reflected his successful transition from individual trader to company founder, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district and walls displaying framed articles about Pinnacle's growth trajectory. His assistant, Jennifer, gestured toward the office door with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, somewhere between sympathy and discomfort. "Good morning, Marcus," I said as I entered his office, carrying the project files he had requested. "I have the current acquisition analyses you wanted to review." Marcus looked up from his computer screen, his expression uncharacteristically serious. Instead of his usual welcoming demeanor, he maintained formal distance that immediately created tension in the room. "Please have a seat, Sarah," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk rather than the more comfortable seating area where we typically conducted our discussion. "I'll be direct because I believe you deserve that courtesy," he began, his voice carrying a tone I had never heard before in our professional relationship. "Pinnacle Financial Solutions is implementing significant organizational restructuring, and your position as senior debt analyst is being eliminated effective immediately." The words hit me with stunning force, not because I hadn't heard them clearly, but because they seemed completely disconnected from the reality of my experience at Pinnacle. I had consistently exceeded performance targets, generated substantial profits for the company, and maintained excellent relationships with both colleagues and external partners. My most recent performance review, conducted just 3 months earlier, had included commendations for innovative analysis and recommendations for expanded responsibilities. "I don't understand," I said, maintaining professional composure while my mind raced to process this unexpected development. "Has there been a performance issue I'm not aware of?" "My recent projects have all met or exceeded projected returns." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding direct eye contact as he continued. "This decision isn't based on performance concerns, Sarah. The restructuring reflects our strategic pivot toward higher volume, technology-driven acquisition processes. The detailed analytical approach you've developed, while valuable, doesn't align with our new operational model focused on rapid transaction processing and algorithmic risk assessment." The explanation revealed the fundamental disconnect between my methodical approach to debt analysis and Pinnacle's evolving business strategy. While I had been building expertise in complex, high-value acquisitions, requiring extensive human analysis, the company was apparently shifting toward automated systems that could process larger volumes of simpler transactions with minimal human intervention. "I see," I replied, though I genuinely struggled to understand how 8 years of successful contribution could be dismissed so abruptly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What about the current projects I'm managing? Several are at critical decision points and represent significant potential value for Pinnacle. Those will be transferred to other team members or placed on hold depending on their compatibility with our new operational framework. Marcus explained with continued formal distance. "We've prepared a separation package that includes 4 months of severance pay, extended health benefits, and positive references for your job search. Jennifer has the documentation for your review." 4 months of severance for 8 years of dedicated service felt inadequate, particularly given the profits my analytical work had generated for the company. However, I recognized that negotiating termination terms was unlikely to prove productive, especially since Marcus had clearly made this decision prior to our meeting, rather than seeking input or exploring alternatives. "When do you expect this transition to be completed?" I asked, maintaining the professional dignity that had characterized my entire career at Pinnacle. "Today will be your final day," Marcus replied. "Human resources will handle the administrative details regarding office clearance and equipment return. We appreciate your contributions to Pinnacle's success and wish you well in your future endeavors." The abruptness of the timeline was almost as surprising as the termination itself. 8 years of building systems, relationships, and expertise reduced to a single day of administrative process. I had expected at least a week or two to transfer project knowledge and ensure continuity for ongoing acquisitions. But apparently Pinnacle's new operational model didn't require such consideration. "I understand," I said, standing and gathering the project files I had brought for what I thought would be a strategic planning discussion. "I'll coordinate with Jennifer regarding the administrative requirement." As I turned to leave Marcus's office, he added one final comment that would resonate far beyond our conversation. "Sarah, I want you to know this decision was difficult but necessary for Pinnacle's future direction. The financial industry is evolving rapidly, and companies that don't adapt get left behind." Walking back to my office, I processed not just the immediate shock of unemployment, but the deeper implications of Marcus's explanation. Pinnacle was abandoning the analytical expertise that had generated significant profits in favor of automated systems that promised efficiency over insight. This strategic pivot reflected broader industry trends toward technology-driven decision-making, but it also suggested that Marcus fundamentally misunderstood the sources of our competitive advantage in the distressed debt market. My office felt different when I returned, already carrying the psychological weight of impending departure. The organized filing systems, analytical tools, and accumulated expertise that had defined my professional identity for 8 years would soon be dispersed or discarded as Pinnacle implemented its new operational model. I began the process of gathering personal belongings and organizing project files for transfer, though I suspected much of this work would prove irrelevant to Pinnacle's algorithmic approach. Jessica Martinez, my closest colleague in the research department, appeared at my office door within minutes of my return. Her expression suggested she had already heard about the morning's developments, likely through the informal communication networks that operate faster than official announcements in corporate environments. "Is it true?" she asked quietly, closing my office door to ensure privacy. "Jennifer mentioned something about organizational restructuring, but I didn't think it would affect you." "Yes, my position has been eliminated," I confirmed, continuing to organize files while we spoke. "Apparently, Pinnacle is shifting toward automated acquisition processes that don't require the analytical approach I've been developing." Jessica's expression shifted from curiosity to genuine concern. As a junior analyst who had worked closely with me on several complex projects, she understood the value of detailed due diligence in identifying profitable acquisition opportunities. "That seems incredibly short-sighted," she said with uncharacteristic directness. "Your analysis has generated millions in profits that automated systems would never have identified." Her assessment aligned with my own evaluation of the situation, though I maintained professional neutrality rather than criticizing Pinnacle's strategic decision. "Different approaches serve different business models," I replied diplomatically. "Marcus believes technology-driven processes will better serve Pinnacle's growth objectives." "What will you do?" Jessica asked, her question reflecting both personal concern and professional curiosity about how someone with my specialized expertise would navigate sudden career transition. "I haven't decided yet," I answered honestly. "First, I need to complete the administrative requirements for leaving Pinnacle. Then I'll evaluate options for applying my analytical skills in new contexts." Our conversation continued for several more minutes, with Jessica expressing genuine appreciation for the mentoring I had provided during her first 2 years at Pinnacle. Her words reminded me that professional relationships often transcend organizational boundaries, creating networks of support and collaboration that continue beyond specific employment context. The remainder of the morning was devoted to administrative tasks, coordinating with human resources about benefit transitions, transferring access codes for various databases and systems, and organizing project files according to the protocols Jennifer had outlined. Throughout this process, I maintained the methodical approach that had characterized my work at Pinnacle, ensuring complete documentation and orderly transition despite the abbreviated timeline. At noon, I encountered David Kumar, another senior analyst who had joined Pinnacle approximately 6 months after me. His expression suggested he was aware of the morning's developments and wanted to discuss their implications for the broader analytical team. "This is unexpected," he said, approaching my office as I packed the last of my personal items. "Have you heard whether other positions might be affected by this restructuring?" "I don't have information about broader organizational changes," I replied honestly. Marcus mentioned strategic pivot toward technology-driven processes, but he didn't detail how that might impact other roles. David's concern was understandable, as his analytical approach shared similarities with mine, focusing on detailed research and careful due diligence rather than high-volume transaction process. If Pinnacle was indeed abandoning this methodological approach, other analysts might face similar career disruption in the coming weeks or months. "Your departure is a significant loss for the company," David continued. "The acquisition opportunities you've identified consistently outperformed market averages. I don't understand how automated systems could replicate that analytical insight." His assessment reflected the respect my analytical work had earned among colleagues, even if it apparently hadn't translated into job security within Pinnacle's evolving business model. The disconnect between peer recognition and organizational value suggested fundamental misalignment between my professional strengths and the company's strategic direction. As I prepared to leave Pinnacle's offices for the final time, I reflected on the 8 years I had spent building expertise in distressed debt analysis. This experience had taught me not just technical skills in financial evaluation, but deeper understanding of how economic distress creates opportunities for those willing to invest time in comprehensive research and patient capital deployment. The methodical approach I had developed at Pinnacle involved extensive analysis of legal documents, financial statements, regulatory filings, and market conditions to identify debt instruments trading below their intrinsic value. This process required weeks or sometimes months of research, but it consistently generated superior returns compared to more conventional acquisition strategies that relied on obvious opportunities and standardized evaluation criteria. More important, this analytical approach had given me comprehensive understanding of the distressed debt market structure, including which institutional investors were most likely to sell undervalued assets, which legal and regulatory factors affected pricing, and which market conditions created the best acquisition opportunities. This knowledge extended far beyond what I had applied in my specific role at Pinnacle, encompassing broader insights about how financial distress creates investment opportunities across various sectors and market segments. Walking out of Pinnacle's building that afternoon, I experienced not the despair typically associated with unexpected job loss, but a curious sense of liberation. For 8 years I had channeled my analytical expertise through Pinnacle's organizational structure, generating profits that benefited the company while receiving salary and benefits in return. Now for the first time I was considering how that same expertise might be applied independently, without institutional constraints or the requirement to align with someone else's strategic vision. The separation package Pinnacle had offered provided 4 months of financial stability, creating time to evaluate opportunities for applying my skills in new contexts. However, I suspected that traditional employment with another financial services company might simply recreate the same fundamental dynamic, using my expertise to generate profits for institutional stakeholders, while remaining vulnerable to organizational decisions beyond my control. That evening, I sat in my apartment overlooking the city's financial district, surrounded by the technical manuals, market analysis reports, and legal reference books that had supported my work at Pinnacle. These resources represented years of accumulated knowledge about distressed debt markets, but they also suggested possibilities I had never seriously considered while focused on building my career within traditional employment structure. What if, instead of seeking another analyst position at a different company, I used my expertise to participate directly in the distressed debt market as an independent investor. The analytical skills I had developed at Pinnacle were not inherently dependent on institutional affiliation. The market knowledge, research methodologies, and evaluation criteria I had refined over 8 years could theoretically be applied through my own investment activities, rather than on behalf of an employee. This possibility had never seriously occurred to me during my tenure at Pinnacle, partly because my salary and benefits had provided comfortable financial security and partly because independent debt investment required substantial capital that I hadn't possessed. However, the separation package, combined with savings I had accumulated during 8 years of steady employment, might provide sufficient resources to begin small-scale independent investing while I developed this alternative approach to applying my expertise. I spent the next several hours researching the practical requirements for individual participation in distressed debt market. Unlike equity investing, which can be conducted through standard brokerage accounts with minimal capital requirements, debt acquisition typically required institutional status and substantial minimum investment. However, I discovered several platforms designed specifically for smaller investors to participate in distressed debt opportunities, though these often came with higher fees and more limited selection compared to institutional access. More intriguingly, I found examples of individual investors who had successfully built substantial portfolios by focusing on local and regional debt instruments that were too small to attract institutional attention, but still offered significant profit potential. These opportunities included municipal bonds from smaller cities, commercial real estate loans from regional banks, and corporate debt from privately held companies undergoing restructuring. The research suggested a viable pathway for applying my analytical expertise independently, starting with smaller investments to build experience and capital while gradually expanding into larger opportunities. This approach would require patience and careful risk management, but it aligned perfectly with the methodical investment philosophy I had developed during my years at Pinnacle. As I continued exploring this possibility, I remembered a conversation I had had with Marcus approximately 6 months earlier about Pinnacle's own debt structure. The company had grown rapidly over the past 5 years, financing expansion through a combination of bank loans, equipment financing, and lease obligations. Marcus had mentioned that managing these debt obligations was becoming increasingly complex as the company grew, particularly since Pinnacle's focus on growth had led to higher leverage ratios than typical for financial services companies. At the time, this conversation had been purely informational, part of my general awareness of company operations, rather than anything directly relevant to my analytical responsibility. However, I now realized that Pinnacle itself might represent exactly the type of investment opportunity I had become expert at identifying: a growing company with complex debt structure that might be creating inefficiencies or opportunities for sophisticated analysis. The irony was compelling. Marcus had terminated my employment because he believed my analytical approach was no longer relevant to Pinnacle's strategic direction. However, that same analytical approach might reveal investment opportunities related to Pinnacle's own debt obligations, particularly if the company's rapid growth had created the type of complexities that automated systems struggled to evaluate properly. Over the following days, I began researching Pinnacle's debt structure, using publicly available information and my general knowledge of the company's financial position. As a privately held company, Pinnacle wasn't required to file detailed financial statements with regulatory agencies, but bank loan databases, equipment financing records, and commercial real estate filings provided substantial information about the company's debt obligations. What I discovered was fascinating. Pinnacle had indeed grown rapidly, but this growth had been financed through a complex web of debt instruments with varying terms, collateral requirements, and repayment schedules. Some of these obligations appeared to be trading at discounts to their face value, possibly due to concerns about the company's high leverage ratios or questions about the sustainability of its growth trajectory. More significantly, I identified several institutional lenders who appeared to be reducing their exposure to Pinnacle's debt, either by selling loan participations to other investors or by declining to renew credit facilities that were approaching maturity. This suggested that sophisticated financial institutions were becoming concerned about Pinnacle's risk profile, creating potential opportunities for individual investors willing to conduct thorough analysis and accept higher risk in exchange for potentially higher returns. The research took on personal as well as professional significance, as I realized that my intimate knowledge of Pinnacle's operations, market position, and strategic challenges provided analytical advantages that external investors couldn't easily replicate. I understood the company's revenue sources, operational strengths and weaknesses, and competitive pressures in ways that financial statements alone couldn't convey. More importantly, I had first-hand experience with the strategic decisions Marcus was making, including the shift toward automated acquisition processes that had led to my termination. This inside knowledge suggested that while Pinnacle might continue growing in the short term, the company was potentially sacrificing long-term competitive advantages for immediate operational efficiency, creating risks that might not be apparent to external debt investors. 2 weeks after my termination, I made a decision that would fundamentally change my relationship with both Pinnacle Financial Solutions and the broader distressed debt market. Using the capital available from my separation package and accumulated savings, I began systematically acquiring portions of Pinnacle's outstanding debt obligations through secondary market transactions. The process required careful coordination with multiple institutional lenders and investment platforms, but my years of experience navigating these markets provided the knowledge necessary to identify opportunities and execute transactions efficiently. I started with smaller positions to test my analytical assumptions, but as my research proved accurate and profitable, I gradually increased my investment until I held significant portions of several different Pinnacle debt instruments. The strategy was straightforward in concept, but sophisticated in execution. By acquiring Pinnacle's debt at discounted prices, I could potentially profit from any improvement in the company's financial position, while also gaining leverage over business decisions if the company encountered financial difficulty. This approach aligned my interests with Pinnacle's success while providing protection against the operational risks I had identified through my insider knowledge. What made this strategy particularly compelling was the time. Marcus's decision to eliminate analytical positions and rely on automated systems was likely to affect Pinnacle's competitive position over the coming month, potentially creating financial pressures that would benefit debt holders willing to work constructively with the company during challenging periods. 3 weeks after beginning this investment strategy, my position in Pinnacle's debt had grown to represent controlling interest in several key obligations. This gave me not just financial exposure to the company's performance, but actual influence over business decisions if Pinnacle encountered difficulties meeting its debt service requirements. The psychological satisfaction of this position was considerable. Marcus had dismissed my analytical expertise as irrelevant to Pinnacle's future success. However, that same expertise had now positioned me as a significant stakeholder in the company's financial structure, with the potential to influence strategic decisions if circumstances warranted such involvement. More importantly, the investment strategy was proving profitable independent of any personal satisfaction about my changed relationship with Pinnacle. The debt instruments I had acquired were generating returns that exceeded what I had earned as a salaried employee, while also providing the intellectual stimulation of applying my analytical skills to complex investment decisions. This experience had fundamentally changed my understanding of how expertise creates value in financial markets. Rather than trading time and knowledge for salary and benefits, I was now applying the same analytical capabilities to generate returns through direct market participation. The transition from employee to investor had liberated me from organizational constraints while amplifying the economic impact of my professional skill. As I reflected on this transformation, I realized that Marcus's decision to terminate my employment had inadvertently created the catalyst for discovering a more effective application of my expertise. The analytical approach he had deemed irrelevant to Pinnacle's automated future had proven highly relevant to generating superior investment returns, particularly when applied with the insider knowledge that my 8 years at the company had provided. The morning Marcus called, 21 days after sending that cold termination email, I was reviewing portfolio performance reports that showed my Pinnacle debt investments had appreciated substantially since my initial purchase. The company was apparently encountering exactly the operational challenges I had anticipated, creating financial pressures that enhanced the value of my debt positions, while simultaneously justifying my original analytical concerns about their strategic direction. When his name appeared on my phone screen, I experienced a moment of perfect professional irony. The boss who had dismissed my expertise as obsolete was now calling because he desperately needed that same analytical knowledge to address problems that my independent research had predicted and positioned me to profit from. The conversation that would follow would demonstrate not just the value of patient analysis and strategic thinking, but the fundamental error in treating expertise as disposable rather than recognizing it as the foundation for sustainable competitive advantage. The weeks following my strategic debt acquisitions unfolded with the methodical precision I had always applied to complex financial analysis. Each morning brought new confirmation that my investment thesis was proving accurate, as Pinnacle Financial Solutions began encountering the exact operational challenges I had anticipated when Marcus shifted toward automated acquisition systems. The irony was not lost on me that the same analytical expertise he had dismissed as obsolete was now generating substantial returns through my independent investment activities. My new daily routine differed dramatically from the structured corporate environment I had known for 8 years. Instead of arriving at Pinnacle's offices by 7:15, I now worked from my apartment's converted second bedroom, which I had transformed into a sophisticated trading and analysis center. Multiple monitors displayed real-time market data, debt trading platforms, and news feeds covering the financial services sector. The space reflected my transition from employee to independent investor, organized around the tools necessary for making complex investment decisions, rather than serving institutional objectives. The financial markets had always fascinated me, but experiencing them as a principal rather than an agent created entirely different psychological dynamics. When analyzing debt opportunities for Pinnacle, I had focused on generating profits for the company while receiving predetermined compensation regardless of actual investment outcome. Now every analytical decision directly affected my personal financial position, creating both greater pressure and more meaningful rewards for accurate assessment and strategic thinking. My investment strategy had evolved beyond the initial Pinnacle debt acquisitions into a broader portfolio of distressed and undervalued debt instruments. The knowledge I had gained during 8 years of institutional analysis translated remarkably well to independent investing, particularly my ability to identify opportunities that larger investors overlooked due to complexity or scale limitation. The key difference was that I could now pursue these opportunities for my own benefit rather than generating profits for others, while accepting career risk if my analyses proved incorrect. 3 weeks into this new professional identity, I received an unexpected phone call from Elena Rodriguez, a former colleague who had left Pinnacle 6 months earlier to join Harrison Capital, a mid-sized investment firm specializing in distressed assets. Elena had been one of the few analysts at Pinnacle whose methodical approach shared similarities with mine, making her departure a significant loss for the company's analytical capabilities. "Sarah, I heard about what happened at Pinnacle," Elena said when I answered her call. "Marcus made a serious mistake letting you go. Your analytical work was consistently the most sophisticated in the department." "Thank you for saying that," I replied, genuinely appreciating her support during what could have been a difficult career transition. "I'm actually finding the independent investment approach quite rewarding. It allows me to apply the same analytical methods without institutional constraints." Elena's interest was clearly more than casual professional concern. "That's actually why I'm calling. Harrison Capital is looking for experienced analysts who understand distressed debt markets, particularly someone with your background in complex due diligence procedures. Would you be interested in discussing potential opportunities?" The offer represented a logical career path following my termination from Pinnacle. Harrison Capital had a solid reputation in the investment community, and Elena's presence there suggested a collaborative analytical environment that might value the methodical approach Marcus had rejected. However, my recent success with independent investing had changed my perspective on traditional employment relationships. "I appreciate you thinking of me," I said carefully. "Right now I'm exploring independent investment opportunities, but I'd be happy to learn more about what Harrison Capital has in mind." We arranged to meet for lunch the following week, giving me time to consider whether returning to institutional employment aligned with my evolving professional objectives. The conversation also reminded me that my departure from Pinnacle was becoming known throughout the local financial community, potentially creating additional opportunities for applying my expertise in various contexts. That afternoon brought another unexpected development. I received a formal letter from Peterson, Williams and Associates, the law firm representing First National Bank, in connection with some irregularities they had identified in their loan documentation with Pinnacle Financial Solutions. The letter requested that I contact their offices to discuss my knowledge of certain debt acquisition procedures that had been implemented during my tenure at Pinnacle. The legal inquiry was concerning on multiple levels. First, it suggested that Pinnacle was indeed encountering operational difficulties related to the procedural changes Marcus had implemented after my departure. Second, it implied that my analytical work at Pinnacle might be relevant to understanding problems the bank had discovered in their loan documentation. Most significantly, it created potential complications for my current investment position in Pinnacle's debt obligation. I called Peterson, Williams and Associates immediately to understand the scope of their inquiry and my potential exposure to legal complication. The conversation with Senior Associate Michael Peterson revealed that First National Bank had identified discrepancies in several loan files related to debt acquisitions that had been processed during my final months at Pinnacle. These discrepancies weren't necessarily fraudulent, but they suggested procedural irregularities that required clarification to maintain the bank's compliance with federal lending regulation. "We're not suggesting any wrongdoing on your part," Peterson explained during our phone conversation. "However, you were apparently the analyst who developed the documentation procedures for these particular transactions. The bank needs to understand the rationale behind certain analytical decisions to satisfy their regulatory requirements." The situation created a complex ethical and strategic challenge. My knowledge of Pinnacle's documentation procedures could certainly help resolve the bank's compliance concerns, but providing this assistance might inadvertently strengthen Pinnacle's position at a time when operational difficulties were benefiting my investment strategy. Additionally, I needed to consider whether my current debt holdings created any conflicts of interest regarding my cooperation with the bank's investigation. I scheduled a meeting with Peterson for the following week while consulting with my own attorney about the potential implications of the bank's inquiry. The legal consultation revealed that my cooperation with the investigation was likely mandatory given the regulatory nature of the bank's concern, but that my current investment position didn't necessarily create prohibitive conflicts as long as I disclosed my financial interest in Pinnacle's debt obligation. More importantly, my attorney suggested that the bank's investigation might actually strengthen my position as a debt holder if it revealed operational deficiencies at Pinnacle that weren't already reflected in market pricing of the company's debt instrument. This possibility transformed the legal inquiry from potential complication into possible catalyst for enhanced investment returns. The following Monday morning brought news that confirmed my most optimistic projections about Pinnacle's operational challenge. Jessica Martinez called to inform me that the company had announced another round of organizational restructuring, this time affecting the technology implementation that Marcus had prioritized over human analytical capability. Apparently, the automated acquisition systems were generating acquisition recommendations that senior management couldn't evaluate effectively, leading to several costly mistakes that were affecting profitability. "It's complete chaos here," Jessica explained during our conversation. "The automated systems are identifying opportunities, but nobody understands how to evaluate whether these recommendations make sense. Marcus is scrambling to find external consultants who can review the system outputs, but most experienced analysts want long-term employment rather than short-term consulting arrangements." The irony was remarkable. Marcus had eliminated my position because he believed automated systems could replace human analytical expertise. Now he was discovering that automated recommendations still required sophisticated human evaluation to distinguish between genuine opportunities and algorithmic error. The operational efficiency he had sought was being undermined by the complexity of the analytical decisions the technology couldn't make independently. "Have they considered bringing back any of the analysts who were let go?" I asked, curious about whether Marcus was reconsidering his strategic direction. Jessica's response revealed the depth of Pinnacle's current difficulties. "Marcus is too proud to admit the restructuring was a mistake. Instead, He's trying to solve the problems by hiring expensive consultants rather than acknowledging that eliminating experienced analysts created operational gaps the technology can't fill. This information significantly enhanced my confidence in the investment strategy I had pursued. Pinnacle's operational difficulties were apparently more severe than external observers realized, creating substantial risks for the company's financial performance that weren't yet reflected in the market pricing of their debt obligation. If these operational problems continued or intensified, my debt positions could appreciate considerably, as other investors recognized the company's deteriorating competitive position. The week continued with additional confirmation of my analytical projection. David Kumar, my former colleague, reached out to discuss his own concerns about Pinnacle's strategic direction. As one of the remaining senior analysts, David had direct exposure to the operational challenges Jessica had described, providing additional insight into the scope of the company's difficulty. The automated systems are generating tremendous volumes of acquisition recommendations, David explained when we met for coffee. But evaluating these opportunities requires exactly the type of detailed analysis that Marcus eliminated when he restructured the department. We're either passing on potentially profitable acquisitions because we can't evaluate them properly, or we're making investments based on incomplete analysis and hoping for the best. David's description confirmed that Pinnacle was caught in a strategic contradiction. The technology Marcus had implemented could identify potential opportunities, but the company no longer possessed the analytical expertise necessary to evaluate these opportunities effectively. This created a competitive disadvantage that was likely to compound over time as more sophisticated competitors gained market share by combining technological efficiency with human analytical insight. Are you looking for other opportunities? I asked David, recognizing that experienced analysts would likely become increasingly valuable as other firms learned from Pinnacle's mistakes. His response revealed another dimension of Pinnacle's challenge. Several competitors have approached me, but Marcus is offering retention bonuses to prevent further departures. He recognizes that losing more analytical expertise would make the operational problems even worse. The retention bonus strategy suggested that Marcus was beginning to understand the value of human analytical capabilities, even if he wasn't willing to admit that eliminating these capabilities had been strategically misguided. However, retention bonuses represented additional financial pressure for Pinnacle at a time when operational inefficiencies were already affecting profitability. 2 weeks later, my investment strategy received validation from an unexpected source. Harrison Capital published a research report analyzing competitive dynamics in the distressed debt acquisition market, specifically highlighting how technological automation was affecting analytical capabilities across the industry. The report mentioned Pinnacle by name as an example of a company that had prioritized operational efficiency over analytical depth, potentially creating long-term competitive vulnerabilities. Elena Rodriguez called me immediately after the report's publication to discuss its implications. Your former employer is becoming a case study in how not to implement technological automation, she said with characteristic directness. Harrison Capital's research team believes Pinnacle is particularly vulnerable to competitive pressure over the next 12 to 18 months. The research report represented external validation of the analytical conclusions that had guided my investment strategy. Harrison Capital's assessment aligned perfectly with my own projections about Pinnacle's operational challenges, suggesting that other sophisticated investors were beginning to recognize the risks that I had identified through insider knowledge and independent analysis. Does this change Harrison Capital's interest in hiring experienced analysts? I asked, recognizing that the research findings might create additional opportunities for applying my expertise in institutional context. Elena's response revealed another dimension of how my strategic positioning was creating unexpected options. Actually, it increases our interest significantly. We're seeing tremendous demand for analysts who understand both traditional due diligence procedures and how to integrate human judgment with technological tools. Your experience at Pinnacle gives you insights that could be extremely valuable for avoiding similar strategic mistakes. The conversation with Elena highlighted an important aspect of my evolving professional identity. While my independent investment activities were proving profitable,
they also provided unique expertise that could enhance my value in traditional employment context. Rather than viewing independent investing and institutional employment as competing alternatives, I was beginning to recognize how these different applications of my skills might complement each other. The following month brought the development I had been anticipating since beginning my debt acquisition strategy. Pinnacle Financial Solutions announced that they were seeking additional financing to support operational improvements and technological upgrade. The company's rapid growth had created capital requirements that existing cash flow couldn't satisfy, particularly given the operational inefficiencies that were affecting profitability. The financing announcement was significant for multiple reasons. First, it confirmed that Pinnacle was encountering the financial pressures I had projected when analyzing their debt structure and operational challenges. Second, it suggested that the company might need to negotiate with existing debt holders to restructure payment terms or collateral requirements. Most importantly, it positioned me as a potentially influential stakeholder in Pinnacle's strategic decisions, given my substantial holdings in their outstanding debt obligation. I immediately began analyzing the terms of Pinnacle's proposed financing to understand how it might affect my existing investments. The preliminary information suggested that new financing would be senior to existing debt obligations, potentially reducing the security of my current position. However, it also indicated that Pinnacle might be willing to negotiate favorable terms with existing debt holders to secure their cooperation with the refinancing process. This situation created a fascinating strategic opportunity. As a former employee with intimate knowledge of Pinnacle's operations, I understood the company's challenges better than most external investors. As a significant debt holder, I had financial leverage to influence potential solutions. The combination of operational knowledge and financial position provided unique advantages for navigating the upcoming negotiation process. The irony of the situation was becoming increasingly apparent.
Marcus had terminated my employment because he believed my analytical approach was incompatible with Pinnacle's technological future. However, that same analytical approach had positioned me to potentially influence the company's financial future at a time when technological implementation was creating exactly the operational problems I had anticipated. 3 days after Pinnacle's financing announcement, I received another call from Peterson, Williams & Associates regarding First National Bank's investigation. Michael Peterson informed me that their analysis had identified additional irregularities in Pinnacle's loan documentation, creating more serious compliance concerns that required immediate attention from bank regulators. The problems appear to be systemic rather than isolated incidents, Peterson explained during our conversation. The bank's compliance review has identified procedural gaps that developed after your departure from Pinnacle. Your analytical procedures apparently provided quality controls that weren't replicated when the company shifted to automated systems. This revelation created additional validation for my investment strategy, while simultaneously complicating my relationship with the ongoing investigation. The bank's findings suggested that my departure from Pinnacle had contributed to operational problems that were now affecting regulatory compliance, potentially creating liability issues for the company that could benefit debt holders willing to provide solutions. I agreed to meet with Peterson the following week to provide information about the documentation procedures I had developed at Pinnacle. However, I also disclosed my current investment position in the company's debt obligations to ensure transparency about my financial interests in the investigation's outcome. The meeting with Peterson proved extremely productive from multiple perspectives. My explanation of Pinnacle's documentation procedures helped the bank understand how regulatory compliance had been maintained during my tenure and why problems had emerged after my departure. This information satisfied the bank's immediate compliance concerns while also documenting the operational value of the analytical expertise Marcus had eliminated. More significantly, Peterson mentioned that First National Bank was considering whether to accelerate repayment requirements for their loans to Pinnacle given the compliance irregularities they had identified. This possibility could create substantial financial pressure for Pinnacle at a time when the company was already seeking additional financing, potentially providing opportunities for existing debt holders to negotiate favorable terms. The following week brought another unexpected development that demonstrated how my strategic positioning was creating cascading opportunity. Elena Rodriguez called to inform me that Harrison Capital was interested in discussing a consulting arrangement rather than traditional employment, recognizing that my independent investment activities might preclude full-time institutional affiliation. We're particularly interested in your insights about operational risks in technology-driven financial services companies, Elena explained. Your experience at Pinnacle provides a case study that could inform our investment decisions across multiple portfolio companies. The consulting opportunity represented an ideal integration of my various professional activities. I could continue managing my independent investment portfolio while applying my analytical expertise to help Harrison Capital evaluate operational risks in potential acquisition. This arrangement would generate additional income while expanding my knowledge of distressed debt markets beyond my current investment focus. I agreed to meet with Harrison Capital's senior management the following week to discuss potential consulting arrangement. The timing was particularly advantageous given the developments at Pinnacle, as my insights about the company's operational challenges could provide immediate value for Harrison Capital's analysis of competitive dynamics in the financial services sector. The weekend before my meeting with Harrison Capital, I spent considerable time analyzing the various opportunities that had emerged since my termination from Pinnacle. The independent investment strategy had proven both profitable and intellectually satisfying, providing direct application of my analytical skills without institutional constraint. The potential consulting relationship with Harrison Capital offered additional income and professional development, while maintaining flexibility for independent activity. Most significantly, my position as a significant holder of Pinnacle's debt obligations created potential influence over the company's strategic decisions during a period of operational difficulty. This convergence of opportunities represented a fundamentally different approach to professional development than the traditional career progression I had pursued at Pinnacle. Rather than seeking advancement within a single organizational structure, I was creating an integrated portfolio of professional activities that applied my expertise across multiple contexts while maintaining independence and financial leverage. The psychological satisfaction of this transformation was considerable. Marcus had dismissed my analytical capabilities as irrelevant to Pinnacle's future success. However, those same capabilities had positioned me as a potentially influential stakeholder in the company's financial future while simultaneously creating opportunities for applying my expertise in other contexts that valued sophisticated analytical insight. Monday morning brought news that would significantly accelerate the timeline for all these developments. Jessica Martinez called to inform me that Pinnacle was facing immediate pressure from multiple lenders who were demanding clarification about the compliance irregularities. First National Bank had identified. Apparently, word of the regulatory concerns had spread throughout the banking community, creating broader questions about Pinnacle's operational procedures. Marcus is in full crisis mode, Jessica explained. The technology systems that were supposed to streamline operations are creating documentation problems that threaten our relationships with major lenders. He's desperately trying to find consultants who understand both our historical procedures and current regulatory requirements. The crisis presented exactly the type of opportunity I had anticipated when developing my investment strategy. Pinnacle's operational difficulties were creating financial pressure that could benefit debt holders willing to provide solutions, while simultaneously demonstrating the value of the analytical expertise Marcus had eliminated. Tuesday brought confirmation that events were accelerating beyond what I had projected in my most optimistic scenario. Elena Rodriguez called to inform me that Harrison Capital had decided to expedite our consulting discussions, given market intelligence, suggesting that several financial services companies were encountering similar operational challenges. We want to understand whether Pinnacle's problems represent isolated poor decision-making or broader industry trends, Elena explained, Your insights could help us identify investment opportunities created by companies that are struggling with technology implementation. The consulting opportunity was expanding beyond analysis of Pinnacle's specific situation into broader market intelligence about operational risks and technology-driven financial service. This development would provide additional income while positioning me as a subject matter expert on technology integration risks, potentially creating long-term professional advantages. Wednesday morning delivered the development that would transform speculation into immediate action. Marcus Chen called my personal phone number for the first time since sending the termination email 6 weeks earlier. His voice carried a tension I had never heard during our professional relationship, suggesting that Pinnacle's situation had deteriorated beyond what I had anticipated. "Sarah, I need to speak with you urgently about some issues that have developed since your departure," Marcus said without preliminary pleasantries. "Several of our lenders are asking questions about analytical procedures that you developed, and we need your expertise to address their concerns." The desperation in his voice was unmistakable. The man who had dismissed my analytical approach as obsolete was now acknowledging that he needed that expertise to address problems that had emerged precisely because he had eliminated. The irony was perfect, but the business opportunity was even more compelling. "I see," I replied, maintaining professional neutrality despite the satisfaction of having my analytical projections vindicated so dramatically. "What specific issues are the lenders concerned about?" Marcus's explanation revealed that Pinnacle's situation was even more serious than the compliance irregularities Peterson had described. Multiple lenders were questioning the company's ability to maintain adequate analytical oversight of their acquisition activities, threatening to accelerate repayment requirements that could create immediate liquidity problems. "We need someone who understands our historical procedures and can help us demonstrate analytical continuity to satisfy lender requirements," Marcus continued. "Given your expertise with our documentation systems, you're uniquely qualified to help resolve these issues." The request created a complex strategic decision. Helping Pinnacle address their lender concerns might stabilize the company's financial position, potentially reducing the appreciation potential of my debt holding. However, it might also provide opportunities to negotiate favorable terms that could benefit both Pinnacle's operational recovery and my investment returns. "I'd be willing to discuss consulting arrangements that might address these issues," I replied carefully. "However, I should mention that my situation has changed considerably since my departure from Pinnacle. I'm now involved in independent investment activities that might create conflicts of interest depending on the specific consulting arrangement." Marcus's response suggested that he was prepared to accommodate significant complications to secure my expertise. "We're open to whatever arrangement makes sense given your current activity. The immediate priority is demonstrating to our lenders that we have access to the analytical expertise necessary to maintain proper oversight of our operations." We agreed to meet the following morning to discuss potential consulting arrangements. As I ended the call, I reflected on the remarkable transformation that had occurred in just 6 weeks. Marcus had terminated my employment because he believed automated systems could replace human analytical expertise. Now he was acknowledging that those same systems had created operational problems that required exactly the analytical capabilities he had eliminated. The meeting would provide opportunities to address Pinnacle's immediate operational challenges, while potentially advancing my own strategic objectives. However, it would also require careful navigation of the complex relationships between my various professional activities and financial interests. Thursday morning arrived with unusual clarity, both in the crisp autumn weather and in my understanding of the strategic position I had developed through methodical analysis and patient execution. The upcoming meeting with Marcus would demonstrate whether my investment strategy had created the leverage necessary to influence Pinnacle's future direction, while addressing the operational challenges that his strategic decisions had created. As I prepared for the meeting, I reviewed the analytical framework I had developed for evaluating complex situations involving multiple stakeholders with competing interests. The framework had served me well during my tenure at Pinnacle when analyzing distressed debt opportunities for the company. Now I would apply the same methodological approach to navigate a situation where I was simultaneously a former employee, current debt holder, potential consultant, and strategic stakeholder in Pinnacle's future success. The meeting with Marcus was scheduled for 10 o'clock Thursday morning at Pinnacle's offices, marking my first return to the building since clearing out my desk 6 weeks earlier. I arrived 15 minutes early, using the extra time to observe the subtle changes that had occurred during my absence. The lobby maintained its polished corporate appearance, but the receptionist's demeanor seemed more stressed than the professional calm I remember. Even the security guard who had greeted me daily for 8 years appeared unusually tense when checking my visitor credential. The elevator ride to the 16th floor felt surreal, carrying me back into an environment where I had spent nearly a decade building expertise that was now being desperately sought by the same executive who had dismissed it as obsolete. The irony was not lost on me that I was returning as an external consultant rather than an employee, with financial leverage through my debt holdings that fundamentally altered the power dynamics of any potential arrangement. Jennifer, Marcus's assistant, greeted me with a mixture of professional courtesy and genuine warmth that suggested she remembered our positive working relationship despite the circumstances of my departure. Her expression also conveyed subtle concern that hinted at the stress levels within the executive suite as Pinnacle's operational challenges intensified. "Marcus is finishing a call with legal counsel," she explained as she escorted me to his office. "He should be available momentarily. Can I get you coffee or anything while you wait?" I accepted her offer of coffee, using the brief delay to mentally review the strategic framework I had prepared for this crucial conversation. The discussion would require careful balance between addressing Pinnacle's immediate operational needs and protecting my interests as a debt holder while exploring potential consulting arrangements that could benefit all parties involved. Marcus emerged from his office exactly at 10 o'clock. His appearance reflecting the pressure he was experiencing from multiple directions. While still impeccably dressed, he carried visible signs of stress that I had never observed during our previous professional interaction. His typically confident demeanor had been replaced by the cautious uncertainty of someone navigating unfamiliar crisis management challenges. "Sarah, thank you for making time on such short notice," he said, extending his hand with formal courtesy that contrasted sharply with the casual friendliness that had characterized our past relationship. "I know the circumstances are unusual, but I genuinely appreciate your willingness to discuss how you might help us address some urgent operational issues. I understand you're facing some challenges related to analytical procedures and lender relationships." Marcus gestured toward the seating area rather than his desk, a strategic choice that suggested he recognized this conversation would be negotiation between equals rather than a traditional employer-consultant discussion. Once we were seated, he began explaining Pinnacle's situation with a level of detail and vulnerability that surprised me. "The technological improvements we implemented after your departure have created unexpected complications," he began, choosing his words carefully. "While the automated systems are generating acquisition opportunities as projected, we're discovering that evaluating these opportunities requires more sophisticated analytical oversight than we initially anticipated." The admission was remarkable, coming from someone who had based my termination on the belief that human analytical expertise was becoming obsolete in favor of algorithmic efficiency. Marcus was essentially acknowledging that the strategic rationale for eliminating my position had proven fundamentally flawed within just 6 weeks of implementation. "I see," I replied neutrally, inviting him to continue his explanation without revealing the satisfaction I felt at having my analytical projections vindicated so quickly and comprehensively. Marcus continued with increasing candor about the scope of Pinnacle's difficulty. "Several of our lending partners have expressed concerns about gaps in our analytical documentation that have emerged since we restructured the research department. These concerns are affecting our ability to maintain existing credit facilities and could impact our planned financing expansion." The revelation confirmed that Pinnacle's operational problems extended beyond internal inefficiencies to external relationship management with critical financial partners. This development significantly enhanced the potential value of my debt holdings, while simultaneously creating urgency around finding solutions that could stabilize the company's position.
What specific analytical gaps are the lenders concerned about? I asked, recognizing that understanding the precise nature of these problems would be essential for evaluating potential consulting arrangements. Marcus's response revealed the depth of the operational dysfunction that had developed following my departure. The automated systems are excellent at identifying potential acquisition opportunities, but they're not providing the detailed due diligence documentation that our lenders require for credit approval. We're either missing opportunities because we can't complete proper analysis quickly enough, or we're making investments based on incomplete evaluation that creates compliance risk. The explanation highlighted exactly the type of strategic contradiction I had anticipated when Marcus chose technological efficiency over analytical sophistication. Automated systems could certainly identify patterns and generate recommendations, but they couldn't replicate the nuanced judgment and comprehensive due diligence that complex debt acquisitions require. Additionally, Marcus continued, First National Bank has identified irregularities in some of our recent acquisition documentation that they believe stem from inadequate analytical oversight. They're questioning our ability to maintain the procedural standards that satisfied their compliance requirements during your tenure. This information aligned with what Michael Peterson had shared during my discussions with the bank's legal counsel, but hearing it directly from Marcus provided additional context about how seriously these compliance concerns were affecting Pinnacle's business relationship. The timing was particularly problematic given the company's need for additional financing to support continued growth. How can I help address these issues? I asked, maintaining professional focus, while recognizing that Marcus's desperation was creating opportunities for favorable consulting terms. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression reflecting the gravity of Pinnacle's situation. We need someone with deep understanding of our historical analytical procedures who can help us demonstrate to lenders that we have adequate oversight capability. Your expertise with our documentation systems and relationship with key lending partners makes you uniquely qualified to help restore confidence in our analytical operation. The request was broader than I had anticipated, encompassing not just technical consulting about analytical procedures, but active relationship management with the financial institutions that provided Pinnacle's operational capital. This expanded scope created additional leverage for negotiating consulting terms, while also requiring careful consideration of potential conflicts with my debt holder status. I appreciate your confidence in my abilities, I replied carefully. However, I should clarify my current situation before we discuss specific consulting arrangements. My circumstances have changed significantly since leaving Pinnacle, and these changes might affect the structure of any potential engagement. Marcus's expression showed curiosity mixed with concern as he waited for me to explain the nature of these changes. I had prepared for this moment carefully, recognizing that disclosure of my debt holdings would fundamentally alter our negotiation dynamics, while potentially creating opportunities for more comprehensive solutions to Pinnacle's challenge. Since leaving Pinnacle, I've been pursuing independent investment activities focused on distressed debt acquisition. I began, choosing my words precisely. Through this work, I've acquired significant positions in several debt instruments, including some related to Pinnacle's own financing obligations. The revelation clearly surprised Marcus, though he maintained professional composure as he processed the implications of my disclosure. I could see him rapidly calculating how my position as a debt holder might affect my willingness to help stabilize Pinnacle's operations, versus potentially benefiting from continued operational difficulty. I see, he said slowly, his tone reflecting both surprise and growing understanding of the complexity this added to our potential arrangement. What percentage of our debt obligations are you referring to? Approximately 37% of your outstanding commercial debt, and 42% of your equipment financing obligations, I replied with the precision that had characterized my analytical work at Pinnacle. These positions were acquired through secondary market transactions over the past several weeks. The specific numbers clearly shocked Marcus, who had apparently not realized that my investment activities had focused so heavily on Pinnacle's debt instrument. His expression shifted from surprise to something approaching alarm, as he calculated the implications of my substantial creditor position. That represents significant influence over our debt structure, he observed with obvious concern. How does this affect your willingness to provide consulting assistance? The question created the perfect opening to establish the terms under which I might be willing to help address Pinnacle's operational challenge. Rather than viewing my debt holdings as an obstacle to consulting, I had structured my investment strategy to create alignment between Pinnacle's operational recovery and my financial interests as a creditor. Actually, it creates strong incentive for me to help Pinnacle address these operational issues, I explained. As a significant debt holder, I benefit from the company's financial stability and long-term success. My investment strategy was based on the belief that Pinnacle's current difficulties are temporary and solvable, particularly with appropriate analytical expertise.
Marcus's relief was visible as he recognized that my creditor position aligned my interests with Pinnacle's recovery, rather than creating conflicts that would prevent productive collaboration. However, his business experience also suggested he understood that my leverage as a debt holder would affect the terms of any consulting arrangement. What kind of consulting structure would make sense given your current position? He asked, clearly recognizing that traditional hourly consulting rates would be inadequate, given the complexity of the situation. I had prepared extensively for this negotiation, developing a framework that would address Pinnacle's immediate operational needs, while positioning me to benefit from the company's recovery through both consulting fees and debt appreciation. The structure I proposed would also provide ongoing influence over Pinnacle's strategic decisions to prevent repetition of the analytical mistakes that had created the current crisis. I would propose a comprehensive consulting arrangement with 3 components. I began, outlining the framework I had developed. First, immediate consulting support to address the analytical gaps that are affecting your lender relationship. Second, ongoing advisory services to help integrate technological efficiency with human analytical oversight. Third, formal involvement in strategic decisions that could affect debt holder interests. The proposal was ambitious, essentially positioning me as both external consultant and strategic advisor with influence over Pinnacle's future direction. However, Marcus's desperation and my leverage as a major creditor created circumstances where such an arrangement might be acceptable to address the company's urgent needs. Marcus considered the proposal for several moments before responding. The first 2 components make sense given our immediate needs and your expertise. The third component would require board approval, but I think we could structure advisory involvement that protects debt holder interests without creating governance complications. His willingness to consider formal strategic involvement demonstrated how seriously Pinnacle's situation had deteriorated. Under normal circumstances, external consultants would never be granted influence over strategic decisions, but my position as a major creditor and the company's urgent need for analytical expertise created unusual bargaining power. What specific analytical issues need immediate attention? I asked, shifting the conversation toward practical implementation while maintaining momentum in our negotiation. Marcus retrieved a folder from his desk and returned to the seating area with documents that outlined the scope of Pinnacle's analytical challenge. The papers revealed that the operational problems extended far beyond what he had initially described, encompassing systematic failures in due diligence procedures, compliance documentation, and risk assessment protocol. First National Bank requires comprehensive review of our analytical procedures for all acquisitions completed since your departure, he explained, highlighting specific sections of the documentation. They want assurance that our current systems can maintain the analytical standards that satisfied their compliance requirements during your tenure. The bank's requirements were extensive, essentially demanding that Pinnacle demonstrate analytical capabilities equivalent to what I had provided as an employee. This created perfect justification for the comprehensive consulting arrangement I had proposed, while also validating the investment strategy I had pursued. Additionally, Marcus continued, we need to establish analytical protocols that satisfy our other lending partners while maintaining the operational efficiency that our technological investments were designed to provide. This requirement highlighted the fundamental challenge Pinnacle faced in balancing efficiency with analytical rigor. The automated systems Marcus had prioritized could certainly improve processing speed, but they couldn't replace the nuanced judgment that complex debt analysis required. Finally, he said, reaching the most sensitive aspect of Pinnacle's situation, we need to address some potential compliance issues that have emerged from inadequate analytical oversight of recent acquisitions. These issues aren't necessarily serious individually, but collectively they suggest systematic problems that could affect our regulatory status. The compliance concerns were the most serious aspect of Pinnacle's difficulties, potentially affecting the company's ability to operate in certain market segments if regulatory authorities determined that analytical oversight was inadequate. This created additional urgency around finding solutions while also demonstrating the value of the expertise Marcus had eliminated. "I can certainly help address these analytical challenges," I confirmed, recognizing that the scope of work would justify the comprehensive consulting arrangement I had proposed. However, implementing effective solutions will require more than technical consult. It will need strategic integration of human analytical expertise with your technological systems. Marcus nodded his agreement, clearly recognizing that temporary consulting wouldn't address the fundamental strategic errors that had created Pinnacle's operational problem. What would strategic integration look like in practical terms? The question provided an opportunity to outline the systematic changes that would be necessary to resolve Pinnacle's analytical deficiencies while preventing future recurrence of similar problems. My recommendations would essentially reverse many of the strategic decisions that had led to my termination, though I framed them as technological enhancement rather than admission of previous error. First, we need to establish analytical review protocols that combine automated efficiency with human judgment for complex acquisitions. I explained, the technology can handle routine screening and documentation, but sophisticated opportunities require human evaluation that can't be automated effectively. This approach would restore the analytical rigor that had characterized Pinnacle's operations during my tenure, while maintaining the operational efficiency that Marcus's technological investments were designed to provide. The integration would address lender concerns about analytical oversight while preventing the compliance problems that had emerged from over-reliance on automated systems. Second, I continued, we need to implement quality control procedures that ensure analytical documentation meets regulatory requirements. This involves both technical compliance and strategic assessment of acquisition risks that automated systems can't evaluate properly. The quality control recommendations addressed the specific compliance concerns that First National Bank and other lenders had identified, while also establishing systematic protections against future analytical failure. These procedures would require ongoing human oversight rather than the purely technological approach Marcus had initially favored. Third, we need to establish ongoing analytical capability that can adapt to changing market conditions and regulatory requirements. This involves training existing staff to integrate technological tools with analytical judgment rather than relying exclusively on either approach. The training component would address the knowledge gaps that had developed following my departure while ensuring that Pinnacle could maintain analytical capabilities without excessive dependence on external consultants. This approach would satisfy lender requirements for ongoing analytical oversight while providing operational flexibility. Marcus listened carefully to my recommendations, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated his growing understanding of how technological efficiency needed to be balanced with analytical sophistication. His questions also revealed that he was beginning to recognize the strategic errors that had created Pinnacle's current difficulties. "These recommendations make sense," he acknowledged after I finished explaining the proposed framework. "How quickly could you implement these changes to satisfy our immediate lender requirements?" The timeline question reflected the urgency of Pinnacle's situation, particularly regarding First National Bank's compliance review and the company's ongoing financing needs. However, implementing comprehensive analytical improvements would require careful planning to ensure sustainable results rather than temporary fixes. The immediate compliance issues could be addressed within 2 weeks with intensive consulting support, I replied. However, implementing sustainable analytical capabilities would require 3 to 4 months of systematic development work. Marcus's expression suggested that the timeline met Pinnacle's urgent needs while providing adequate time for comprehensive improvement. What consulting terms would be appropriate for this scope of work? The compensation discussion provided an opportunity to establish terms that reflected both the urgency of Pinnacle's needs and my leverage as a major creditor. Rather than traditional hourly consulting rates, I proposed a structure that aligned my compensation with successful resolution of Pinnacle's operational challenge. I would recommend a combination of immediate consulting fees for urgent compliance work and performance-based compensation tied to successful resolution of the analytical issues. I explained. This approach ensures that my interests align with Pinnacle's recovery while providing appropriate compensation for the scope of work involved. The performance-based structure was strategically important because it demonstrated confidence in my ability to solve Pinnacle's problems while also providing additional upside potential if my solutions proved particularly effective. More importantly, it established precedent for ongoing involvement in Pinnacle's strategic decisions as the company recovered from its current difficulty. Marcus agreed to discuss specific compensation terms with the board while moving forward immediately with urgent compliance consulting to address First National Bank's requirements. We scheduled a follow-up meeting for the next day to finalize consulting documentation and begin practical implementation of the analytical improvements Pinnacle needed. As our initial meeting concluded, Marcus made one final comment that demonstrated how dramatically his perspective had shifted during our conversation. I want to acknowledge that eliminating your position was clearly a strategic error. Your analytical expertise was more valuable than I recognized, and I hope we can establish a working relationship that benefits both Pinnacle's recovery and your consulting practice. The admission was significant, representing acknowledgement that the technological automation strategy had failed to deliver the operational improvements Marcus had projected. More importantly, it suggested willingness to modify Pinnacle's strategic approach to incorporate the analytical capabilities necessary for sustainable competitive. Walking out of Pinnacle's offices after our meeting, I reflected on how dramatically the power dynamics had shifted since my termination 6 weeks earlier. Marcus had eliminated my position based on the belief that automated systems could replace human analytical expertise. Now he was acknowledging that this strategy had created operational problems, serious enough to threaten the company's financial stability. The consulting arrangement we had discussed would provide immediate income while advancing my strategic objectives as a debt holder. More significantly, it positioned me to influence Pinnacle's future direction in ways that would prevent repetition of the analytical mistakes that had created the current crisis. Friday morning brought final confirmation that events were accelerating beyond what either Marcus or I had anticipated. Jennifer called to inform me that First National Bank had accelerated their timeline for compliance review, requiring immediate analytical documentation for all acquisitions completed since my departure from Pinnacle. Marcus would like to begin consulting work immediately, she explained. Can you be available this afternoon to start reviewing the analytical files that First National Bank is questioning? The accelerated timeline created additional urgency while also demonstrating the severity of Pinnacle's compliance situation. However, it also provided opportunities to demonstrate immediate value through my consulting services while establishing precedent for ongoing involvement in analytical operations. I agreed to begin consulting work that afternoon, recognizing that rapid response to First National Bank's requirements would strengthen my position in subsequent negotiations about long-term strategic involvement. The weekend would be devoted to comprehensive review of Pinnacle's analytical procedures and preparation of documentation that would satisfy regulatory requirements. Monday morning brought news that would fundamentally change the trajectory of both Pinnacle's recovery efforts and my strategic position as a creditor and consultant. Marcus called to inform me that the board had approved the comprehensive consulting arrangement I had proposed, including formal advisory involvement in strategic decisions affecting debt holder interest. The board recognizes that your expertise is essential for addressing our current challenges, Marcus explained during our phone conversation. They're also impressed by your professional approach to balancing creditor interests with consulting responsibility. The board approval represented validation of the strategic positioning I had developed through careful investment planning and professional relationship management. More importantly,
it provided formal authority to influence Pinnacle's strategic decisions in ways that would benefit both the company's recovery and my interests as a major creditor. Tuesday brought another development that demonstrated how my strategic positioning was creating cascading opportunities across multiple professional contexts. Elena Rodriguez called to inform me that Harrison Capital had decided to accelerate their consulting engagement based on market intelligence, suggesting that Pinnacle's problems might be indicative of broader industry trends. Your insights about operational risks in technology-driven financial services are proving extremely valuable, Elena explained. We're seeing similar analytical challenges at several companies we're evaluating for potential acquisition. The Harrison Capital consulting opportunity was expanding beyond analysis of Pinnacle's specific situation into broader market intelligence about technology integration risks across the financial services sector. This development would provide additional income while positioning me as a subject matter expert on operational challenges that were affecting multiple companies. Wednesday morning delivered confirmation that my investment strategy was generating returns that exceeded my most optimistic projections. The secondary market pricing for Pinnacle's debt instruments had appreciated significantly as news of the consulting arrangement and planned analytical improvements spread throughout the investment community. More importantly, several institutional investors had approached me about participating in potential refinancing arrangements for Pinnacle if the company's operational improvements proved successful. These discussions suggested that my position as a major creditor could provide opportunities for additional profitable investments as Pinnacle recovered from its current difficulty. Thursday brought the meeting I had been anticipating since beginning my debt acquisition strategy 7 weeks early. Marcus requested a comprehensive discussion about Pinnacle's strategic direction, acknowledging that the analytical problems the company faced reflected broader issues with the technological automation approach he had implemented. I've been thinking about our conversation regarding the balance between efficiency and analytical rigor. Marcus began when we met in his office. It's becoming clear that the either-or approach we initially took was strategically misguided. The admission represented fundamental acknowledgement that eliminating human analytical expertise in favor of pure technological automation had been a strategic error. More importantly, it suggested willingness to implement the integrated approach I had recommended for combining technological efficiency with analytical sophistication. The most successful financial services companies seem to be those that use technology to enhance human analytical capabilities rather than replace them, he continued. Your consulting work over the past week has demonstrated how this integration could work in practical terms. Marcus's recognition of the value of integrated analytical approach validated the strategic framework I had developed for addressing Pinnacle's operational challenge. It also created opportunities for long-term strategic involvement that would benefit both the company's competitive position and my interests as a major creditor. I'd like to discuss the possibility of formalizing your advisory role beyond the current consulting arrangement, Marcus said, reaching the primary purpose of our meeting. The board believes that ongoing analytical oversight would help prevent recurrence of the problems we've experienced. The proposal for formalized advisory involvement represented exactly the strategic influence I had sought through my investment and consulting activity. Rather than temporary consulting support, Marcus was suggesting ongoing involvement in Pinnacle's strategic decisions with authority to ensure that analytical capabilities remained adequate for operational requirements. What kind of formal advisory role are you considering? I asked, recognizing that the specific structure would be crucial for balancing my various interests as creditor, consultant, and potential strategic advisor. Marcus outlined a comprehensive advisory framework that would provide significant influence over Pinnacle's analytical operations, while maintaining appropriate boundaries regarding other business functions. The role would include oversight of analytical procedures, approval authority for major acquisition decisions, and formal input on strategic initiatives that could affect operational capability. We're also prepared to discuss equity participation if that would align your interests more directly with Pinnacle's long-term success, Marcus added, introducing a possibility I hadn't anticipated. The equity option created additional complexity for evaluating the advisory role, particularly given my existing position as a major debt holder. However, it also suggested that Pinnacle's board genuinely valued my contributions and was willing to provide substantial compensation for ongoing strategic involvement. As our meeting concluded, I realized that my strategic positioning had created opportunities that extended far beyond what I had originally envisioned when beginning my debt acquisition activity. The combination of creditor leverage, consulting expertise, and strategic advisory influence provided unprecedented ability to shape Pinnacle's future direction while protecting my financial interests. Friday morning brought the final development that would complete my transition from terminated employee to strategic stakeholder with decisive influence over Pinnacle's recovery and future growth. The board formally approved my appointment as Chief Analytical Advisor with comprehensive authority over analytical operations and strategic involvement in all major business decisions. The appointment represented complete vindication of the analytical expertise Marcus had dismissed as obsolete just 2 months earlier. More importantly, it provided the strategic influence necessary to ensure that Pinnacle's technological capabilities would be properly integrated with human analytical expertise rather than replacing it entirely. As I prepared to begin my new role as Chief Analytical Advisor, I reflected on the remarkable transformation that had occurred through careful strategic planning and patient execution. Marcus had eliminated my position because he believed automated systems could provide superior analytical capabilities at lower cost. The operational failures that resulted from this decision had created opportunities for me to demonstrate the enduring value of sophisticated human analysis while building financial leverage through debt acquisition. The strategic framework I had developed for balancing technological efficiency with analytical rigor would now be implemented with my direct oversight, ensuring that Pinnacle's competitive advantages would be sustainable rather than vulnerable to the type of strategic errors that had created the recent crisis. More importantly, my formal advisory role would provide ongoing influence to prevent future decisions that could undermine the analytical capabilities essential for success in complex debt markets. The irony of the situation was perfect. Marcus had terminated my employment via email because he believed my analytical approach was incompatible with Pinnacle's technological future. Now I was returning with formal authority over analytical operations and strategic influence over the company's direction. Having used the very analytical expertise he had dismissed to acquire financial leverage and demonstrate indispensable value for addressing the operational challenges his decisions had created. My first day as Chief Analytical Advisor began with a symbolic gesture that captured the complete transformation of my relationship with Pinnacle Financial Solutions. Marcus personally escorted me to what had previously been the executive conference room on the 16th floor, now converted into my dedicated analytical command center. The space featured state-of-the-art monitoring equipment, direct access to all trading platforms, and a team of 6 junior analysts who would report directly to me. The irony was exquisite. 2 months ago, Marcus had eliminated my modest office on the 14th floor because he believed human analytical expertise was becoming obsolete. Now he was providing me with premium real estate and expanded resources because that same expertise had proven essential for the company's survival. The reversal demonstrated not just the failure of his technological automation strategy, but the fundamental misunderstanding of how sophisticated analysis creates sustainable competitive advantage. Jessica Martinez knocked on my new office door at precisely 9 o'clock, carrying a comprehensive briefing folder that outlined the current status of Pinnacle's analytical operation. Her expression reflected a mixture of professional excitement and personal satisfaction at seeing me return with enhanced authority rather than simply finding employment elsewhere. The team is eager to begin implementing the integrated analytical framework you developed, she said, placing the folder on my desk with obvious enthusiasm. Everyone understands that the technological systems were creating gaps that needed to be addressed. Her comment reflected the broader sentiment among Pinnacle's analytical staff, who had witnessed firsthand how the automated systems failed to provide the nuanced judgment that complex debt acquisitions require. Rather than viewing my return as criticism of their work, they recognized it as validation of the analytical approach they had always believed was necessary for sustained success. The briefing folder contained detailed documentation of every analytical failure that had occurred since my departure, organized with the methodical precision I had taught Jessica during her development as a research analyst. The patterns were clear and damning. Automated systems had identified numerous acquisition opportunities, but the lack of sophisticated due diligence had resulted in several costly mistakes that were affecting both profitability and regulatory compliance.
More significantly, the documentation revealed that Pinnacle's competitors were gaining market share by combining technological efficiency with human analytical expertise, exactly the integrated approach I had recommended during my consulting negotiations with Marcus. Companies that had avoided the either-or mistake were consistently outperforming Pinnacle in both acquisition quality and overall returns. My first strategic priority was addressing the immediate compliance issues that continued threatening Pinnacle's relationship with First National Bank and other key lenders. The bank's requirements had become even more stringent following additional irregularities discovered during their expanded review of Pinnacle's recent acquisitions. I spent the morning reviewing every questionable transaction, applying the same analytical rigor that had characterized my work during 8 years as a senior analyst. The process revealed systematic deficiencies in due diligence procedures, risk assessment protocols, and documentation standards that had developed during the brief period when automated systems operated without adequate human oversight. However, the review also identified several acquisition opportunities that the automated systems had correctly flagged but that hadn't been pursued due to complexity concerns. These represented immediate profit potential that could help offset the losses from previous analytical failures while demonstrating the value of the integrated approach I was implementing. At 11:30, Marcus requested an emergency meeting to discuss new developments that had emerged overnight. His expression suggested a mixture of urgency and optimism that contrasted sharply with the desperation he had shown during our initial consulting discussion. Two significant developments, he began without preamble once I arrived in his office. First, Harrison Capital has approached us about a potential strategic partnership based on their assessment of the analytical improvements you're implementing. Second, First National Bank has indicated willingness to expand our credit facilities if we can demonstrate sustained analytical capabilities. Both developments validated the strategic positioning I had created through my consulting work and formal advisory appointment. Harrison Capital's interest suggested that my reputation in the distressed debt community was enhancing Pinnacle's credibility with sophisticated institutional investors. The bank's willingness to expand credit indicated that our compliance remediation efforts were succeeding beyond minimum requirements. What kind of strategic partnership is Harrison Capital considering? I asked, recognizing that Elena Rodriguez's firm could provide valuable opportunities for expanding Pinnacle's market reach while leveraging my existing consulting relationship with. Marcus outlined a comprehensive collaboration framework that would allow Pinnacle to participate in larger acquisition opportunities through partnership with Harrison Capital's institutional resources. The arrangement would provide access to deals that exceeded Pinnacle's individual capacity while sharing analytical expertise that both firms could benefit from. They specifically mentioned that your involvement as chief analytical advisor was a key factor in their interest. Marcus continued. Apparently your consulting work with them has demonstrated analytical capabilities they want to access on a more regular basis. The revelation confirmed that my multidimensional professional strategy was creating synergistic benefits across different relationships. My consulting work with Harrison Capital had enhanced my reputation while simultaneously increasing Pinnacle's attractiveness as a strategic partner. This dynamic was generating opportunities that neither firm could access independently. The partnership proposal includes significant expansion of our analytical capabilities. Marcus explained, retrieving documents that outlined Harrison Capital's vision for the collaboration. They want to establish a joint analytical center that would serve both firms while maintaining our respective competitive advantage. The joint analytical center concept was fascinating, essentially creating an institutional framework for the type of sophisticated analysis that individual firms struggled to maintain independently. The arrangement would provide economies of scale, while preserving the specialized expertise that each firm had developed in different market segments. More importantly, for my strategic objectives, the partnership would position me as the bridge between two successful firms rather than simply an advisor to Pinnacle's recovery efforts. This role would enhance my influence in the broader distressed debt community while providing additional income streams through expanded consulting relationships. What timeline is Harrison Capital considering for implementing this partnership? I asked, recognizing that coordination between our current recovery efforts and potential expansion opportunities would require careful strategic planning. Marcus's response revealed that Harrison Capital was prepared to move quickly once Pinnacle demonstrated sustained analytical improvements and regulatory compliance. They want to see 90 days of consistent performance before finalizing partnership terms, but they're willing to begin preliminary integration immediately. The timeline aligned perfectly with my projections for completing Pinnacle's analytical rehabilitation while providing adequate time to establish the sustainable operational improvements that would make the partnership valuable for both firms. More importantly, it created additional motivation for ensuring that our current efforts succeeded beyond minimum requirements. The second development regarding First National Bank's willingness to expand credit facilities was equally significant for multiple reasons. Enhanced credit availability would support Pinnacle's growth objectives, while reducing the financial pressure that had created urgency around my consulting engagement. Additionally, improved banking relationships would enhance the company's overall financial stability and market credibility. The bank's credit expansion is contingent on maintaining the analytical standards you're implementing. Marcus explained, they want assurance that the compliance issues we've addressed won't recur as the company grows. This requirement essentially made my continued involvement a condition for Pinnacle's access to growth capital, creating additional leverage for ensuring that the integrated analytical approach would be permanently maintained rather than abandoned if short-term pressures arose. Over the following weeks, my work as Chief Analytical Advisor began generating results that exceeded even my optimistic projections for Pinnacle's recovery potential. The analytical framework I implemented was identifying profitable acquisition opportunities at a rate 30% higher than the company's historical average, while maintaining documentation standards that satisfied all regulatory requirements. More significantly, the quality of acquisitions was improving dramatically as human analytical expertise filtered automated recommendations through sophisticated risk assessment and market timing consideration. The technology provided efficient screening and data processing, but human judgment determined which opportunities aligned with strategic objectives and market conditions. The success of the integrated approach was attracting attention throughout the financial services community, with several firms requesting consulting services to implement similar frameworks for their own operations. These opportunities represented additional income potential while expanding my influence in the broader industry. 3 weeks into my role as Chief Analytical Advisor, Marcus announced that Pinnacle's quarterly performance had exceeded projections by 18%, driven primarily by improved acquisition quality and operational efficiency. The announcement was accompanied by board approval for accelerated expansion of analytical capabilities and formal recognition of my contribution to the company's recovery. The board wants to discuss long-term arrangements that would ensure your continued involvement as Pinnacle grows, Marcus explained during our weekly strategic review meeting. They recognize that the analytical expertise you provide is fundamental to our competitive advantage. The discussion of long-term arrangements provided an opportunity to formalize the strategic influence I had been developing through my various professional activities. Rather than traditional employment or consulting relationships, I proposed an integrated advisory structure that would accommodate my diversified professional portfolio while ensuring sustained contribution to Pinnacle's analytical operation. The proposal included equity participation in Pinnacle's growth, ongoing analytical advisory responsibilities, and formal authority over strategic decisions that could affect operational capability. This structure would align my interests with the company's long-term success, while maintaining the independence that had proven valuable for objective analytical judgment. Marcus responded positively to the integrated advisory concept, recognizing that traditional employment structures wouldn't accommodate the multidimensional professional identity I had developed. The board is prepared to be creative about structuring arrangements that benefit both Pinnacle and your broader professional objectives. The willingness to accommodate non-traditional arrangements demonstrated how dramatically my leverage had increased through successful demonstration of analytical value combined with my position as a major creditor. Pinnacle needed my expertise for sustained success, creating bargaining power that extended far beyond typical advisor relationships. As my fourth week as Chief Analytical Advisor concluded, I reflected on the remarkable transformation that had occurred through strategic planning and patient execution. Marcus had terminated my employment because he believed automated systems could provide superior analytical capability. The operational failures that resulted had created opportunities for me to demonstrate indispensable value while building financial leverage through debt acquisition. The analytical framework I had implemented was generating superior returns while maintaining regulatory compliance, validating the integrated approach I had advocated from the beginning. More importantly, my success was creating opportunities for expanded influence in the broader financial services community through consulting relationships and strategic partnerships. The partnership discussions with Harrison Capital were progressing rapidly, with preliminary agreements expected within the next month. These arrangements would provide access to larger acquisition opportunities while expanding the market for analytical consulting services I was developing as a secondary professional focus. My debt holdings in Pinnacle had appreciated substantially as the company's operational improvements became apparent to other investors. Several institutional funds had approached me about participating in potential refinancing arrangements that would provide additional profit opportunities while supporting Pinnacle's continued growth. Most satisfying was the recognition that my strategic positioning had created sustainable competitive advantage rather than temporary crisis resolution. The analytical capabilities I was implementing would continue generating value long after the immediate compliance issues had been resolved, ensuring ongoing relevance, regardless of future technological development. The morning of my one-month anniversary as Chief Analytical Advisor brought news that would complete the transformation from terminated employee to strategic industry leader. Marcus called an emergency board meeting to announce that Pinnacle had been selected as the preferred analytical partner for a consortium of institutional investors seeking sophisticated due diligence support for $1 billion distressed debt acquisition program. Your reputation in the analytical community was the deciding factor, Marcus explained as we prepared for the board presentation. The consortium specifically requested Pinnacle based on the analytical improvements you've implemented and your personal involvement in the engagement. The consortium opportunity represented validation not just of my analytical expertise but of the strategic value of the integrated approach I had developed for combining technological efficiency with human judgment. More importantly, it positioned Pinnacle as a leader in sophisticated analytical services rather than simply a regional debt acquisition. The board meeting that afternoon resulted in unanimous approval for accepting the consortium engagement and formal recognition of my role as Chief Analytical Advisor as essential for Pinnacle's competitive position. The discussion also included preliminary approval for the equity participation structure I had proposed, pending final negotiation of specific terms. As I left Pinnacle's offices that evening, I experienced profound satisfaction at having transformed professional crisis into strategic opportunity through methodical analysis and patient capital deployment. Marcus had dismissed my expertise as incompatible with technological automation, but that same expertise had proven indispensable for achieving the operational excellence that automation alone couldn't provide. The integrated analytical framework I had implemented was generating superior returns while maintaining regulatory compliance, creating sustainable competitive advantage that would benefit Pinnacle for years to come. More importantly, my success was establishing me as a recognized leader in analytical services with influence extending throughout the financial services community. The debt acquisition strategy that had begun as defensive positioning against career disruption had evolved into comprehensive strategic leverage that created opportunities far beyond what traditional employment could provide. My position as both creditor and advisor ensured that my interests remained aligned with Pinnacle's success while providing independence to pursue additional professional opportunities. The ultimate irony was perfect. Marcus had eliminated my position via email,
because he believed technological automation made human analytical expertise obsolete. Now I was returning with enhanced authority and expanded influence, having used that same analytical expertise to acquire financial leverage and demonstrate indispensable value for achieving the operational excellence he had sought through technology alone. 6 months after Marcus had terminated my employment via that cold email, I stood before Pinnacle's board of directors presenting the annual analytical performance report that would reshape the company's entire strategic direction. The numbers were undeniable. Acquisition quality had improved by 43%, regulatory compliance issues had been eliminated entirely, and profitability had increased by 67% since implementing the integrated analytical framework. Marcus sat at the far end of the conference table, no longer the confident executive who had dismissed my expertise as obsolete. His expression carried the weight of someone who had learned that technological automation without human judgment creates more problems than it solves. The quarterly reports, spread before him, told the story of his strategic miscalculation in stark numerical terms. The consortium engagement has generated $12.8 million in advisory fees, while positioning Pinnacle as the premier analytical firm in our regional market. I continued, highlighting the achievements that had transformed the company from crisis management to industry leadership. Additionally, our partnership with Harrison Capital has opened access to institutional opportunities that were previously beyond our reach. Board Chairwoman Margaret Foster nodded approvingly as she reviewed the financial projections I had prepared. These results demonstrate that analytical expertise remains fundamental to competitive advantage, regardless of technological capabilities. Her observation captured the essential lesson that Marcus had learned through operational failure rather than strategic force. Technology could certainly enhance human analytical capabilities, but it couldn't replace the nuanced judgment that complex debt markets require. The integration approach I had implemented proved that efficiency and sophistication weren't competing objectives, but complementary elements of sustainable success. I want to formally acknowledge that my decision to eliminate Sarah's position represented a fundamental strategic error, Marcus said, addressing the board with the humility that crisis management had taught him. The operational difficulties we experienced demonstrated that analytical expertise is essential rather than expendable. His admission was remarkable, coming from someone whose career had been built on confident decision-making and strategic vision. However, the acknowledgement was necessary for establishing the credibility required to support Pinnacle's future growth under the analytical framework I had developed. The board voted unanimously to approve the comprehensive strategic plan I had prepared, including permanent establishment of the Analytical Center, expansion of human expertise integrated with technological tools, and formal recognition of analytical capabilities as Pinnacle's core competitive advantage. The vote represented complete vindication of the methodological approach Marcus had rejected just months earlier. More significantly, the board approved my appointment as Chief Strategy Officer with equity participation that reflected my contribution to the company's transformation. The position provided authority over all analytical operations, while ensuring that technological implementations would enhance, rather than replace, human expertise. As the meeting concluded, Margaret Foster approached me privately to discuss the broader implications of Pinnacle's analytical success. Your approach to integrating technology with human judgment is attracting attention throughout the financial services industry. Several other firms have requested consulting services to implement similar frameworks. The external interest represented opportunities for expanding my influence beyond Pinnacle while applying the analytical methodology I had refined through practical implementation. These consulting engagements would provide additional income while establishing me as a recognized authority on operational excellence in financial services. 2 weeks later, Marcus requested a private meeting to discuss his perspective on the remarkable transformation that had occurred since my return as Chief Analytical Advisor. His office, once the symbol of executive authority that had intimidated employees, now felt like neutral territory where former adversaries could discuss professional lessons learned. I've been reflecting on the strategic mistakes that created this crisis, he began with characteristic directness. The fundamental error wasn't believing in technological capabilities, but assuming that automation could replace rather than enhance human expertise. His analysis demonstrated sophisticated understanding of why the either-or approach had failed while integrated methodology had succeeded. Technology provided efficiency and data processing power, but human judgment determined how to apply technological capabilities to complex decisions, requiring market timing, risk assessment, and strategic thinking. The irony isn't lost on me that eliminating your position created the conditions for you to demonstrate indispensable value while acquiring financial leverage through debt investment, Marcus continued. Your strategic response to termination was more sophisticated than my strategic rationale for implementing it. The acknowledgement was both professional courtesy and genuine recognition that my analytical expertise had proven superior to his technological automation strategy. More importantly, it represented acceptance that sustainable competitive advantage required exactly the type of methodological sophistication he had initially rejected. Looking forward, I hope we can maintain the collaborative relationship that has proven so beneficial for Pinnacle's competitive position, he said, effectively acknowledging that our professional relationship had fundamentally shifted from employer-employee to strategic partner. The conversation concluded with mutual recognition that my transformation from terminated employee to strategic leader had benefited both my career objectives and Pinnacle's operational success. The debt acquisition strategy that had begun as defensive positioning had evolved into comprehensive leverage that created opportunities extending far beyond traditional employment relationships. 3 months later, I received an invitation that would complete my professional transformation from regional analyst to industry leader. The National Association of Financial Analysts requested my participation as keynote speaker at their annual conference, specifically to address the integration of technological automation with human analytical expertise. The speaking opportunity represented recognition that my experience at Pinnacle had produced insights valuable for the broader financial services community. Rather than viewing my termination and return as isolated corporate drama, industry leaders recognized it as a case study in how technological implementation could succeed or fail depending on strategic approach. The keynote address I delivered focused on the fundamental principle that had guided my analytical work throughout my career: sophisticated financial markets require sophisticated analytical capabilities that combine technological efficiency with human judgment. Automation could enhance these capabilities, but couldn't replace them without creating operational vulnerabilities that competitors could exploit. The response from conference attendees was overwhelming, with dozens of firms requesting consulting services to evaluate their own technology integration strategy. These opportunities represented the foundation for establishing an independent analytical consulting practice that would apply my expertise across multiple industry segments. As I reflected on the year that had transformed my professional identity from corporate employee to strategic industry leader, I recognized that Marcus's email termination had inadvertently created the catalyst for discovering more effective applications of my analytical expertise. The crisis that had initially threatened my career had ultimately expanded my influence beyond what traditional employment could provide. The debt acquisition strategy that had positioned me as Pinnacle's creditor had evolved into comprehensive strategic leverage that ensured my analytical expertise would be valued rather than dismissed. The consulting relationships that had emerged from my industry recognition were generating income that exceeded my previous salary while providing intellectual challenges that corporate employment had never offered. Most importantly, the integrated analytical framework I had developed was being implemented across multiple firms, creating sustainable competitive advantages while establishing analytical sophistication as essential rather than optional for success in complex financial markets. The ultimate vindication came 6 months later when Marcus called to inform me that Pinnacle had been acquired by Harrison Capital in a transaction that valued the company at 3 times its worth before implementing my analytical improvement. My equity participation in the acquisition generated returns that exceeded what decades of traditional employment could have provided. The transformation was complete. Marcus had terminated my employment via email because he believed technological automation made human analytical expertise obsolete. Instead, his strategic error had created opportunities for me to demonstrate that sophisticated analysis remains fundamental to sustainable competitive advantage, regardless of technological capability. My analytical expertise, once dismissed as incompatible with Pinnacle's technological future, had become the foundation for industry leadership that extended far beyond any single corporate relationship. The methodical approach that had characterized my work for 8 years had proven adaptable to independent investment, strategic consulting, and industry transformation in ways that traditional employment had never allowed. The email that had ended my employment at Pinnacle had ultimately begun a new chapter of professional influence that demonstrated the enduring value of analytical excellence in an increasingly complex financial world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.